Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Progression to Analog. Today, we're here with Steve Rathje. Hi, Steve.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Great to be with you again.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of people may know Steve from his TikTok presence, where he has over 1 million followers, making a lot of videos about psychology.
Yep.
Steve Psychology.
Steve Psychology. Yeah, I'm Steve Psychology on TikTok. I'm an academic psychologist by day and a TikToker by night.
Yes, and an incoming assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon.
Right. In fall of 2026, I will be an assistant professor of human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon University.
Very exciting.
Where I will be starting the Psychology of Technology lab.
Wow.
So I'll be exploring all things related to psychology and technology. Like broadly, my research is about how technology like social media and AI interacts with important psychological variables like intergroup conflict, polarization, and mental health.
Wow.
And I also talk about that on TikTok a lot. So yeah.
And what's amazing about you is you take a really strong academic background. So undergrad Stanford, PhD from Cambridge, and now incoming professor at Carnegie Mellon. And you distill all that knowledge and all your research into really accessible videos for everyone. And some of your postdoc research at NYU has been really influential in this as well. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about how you got started in this mix of academia and videos and sharing all of your research with a broader audience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess let's start in the very beginning. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and I was very much like a theater kid. I was an actor. I did acting, musical theater, playwriting. I was just like very creative. And when I got into Stanford, I was like, oh, maybe I want to like study English. I want to study theater. I wasn't really into psychology. And then I took an intro to psychology class at Stanford, and I was like, wow, psychology is about like all of these same human mysteries that we explore in theater and the arts and acting. And then I got like really into psychology. I started doing psychology research, eventually got a PhD in psychology at the University of Cambridge right after Stanford, where I began getting into all these questions about like technology, social media, and polarization. But I think that part of me that still loved like theater, communication, public speaking was like very much still in me. And I think that's the part that became this TikToker. Yeah. And before I started doing academic research, like back when I was at Stanford, I started, writing blogs for Psychology Today, writing articles for The Guardian about psychology and how these issues in psychology related to things we were going through in society. The 2016 election at that time, so there was a huge interest in the psychology of politics, voting, fake news, and everything like that. So I got really interested in writing about psychology for a popular audience, but I think, as a theater kid at heart, I love being in front of like the camera, and I love like explaining things and sort of distilling scientific and psychological findings down, because like I think psychology, and especially if you're studying the psychology of things like technology that people are really interested in, people care about, people can use psychology findings to better their life.
Definitely.
And I think when it comes to technology, and I mean, you do all this with your podcasts, everyone is like dealing with these issues of, addiction to social media. What should we do with the youth mental health crisis, and how is that related to social media and technology? These are issues that people really care about. So when I like make a TikTok and the TikTok is seen by a broad audience, I feel good that people are able to like use these psychology findings to improve their life or better understand the world.
Definitely. And you've done a great job of bridging academia and practice and bringing so many of these findings to a mainstream audience. And one thing that I want to start with is your research on the psychology of virality.
Yes.
So you had a 2021 paper called Outgroup Animosity Drives Engagement on Social Media. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that paper?
That was the first paper of my PhD, and it's my most cited paper that sort of led to a lot of my follow-up research. So sort of early in my PhD, I was really interested in polarization in the United States and how that might relate to social media. And I started scraping all these massive data sets of millions of social media posts from Facebook and Twitter. So I scraped data sets from Congress members in the United States and news media articles from the left and right. And I wanted to look at what was sort of the best predictor of virality. And what I found in this paper was that when a politician or news article talks about a member of the out group, this leads to like extreme virality. This is the biggest predictor of virality.
Wow.
And people will mostly talk about the outgroup in a negative light.
Yeah.
Like a Democratic politician or a Democratic media organization will dunk on the outgroup, and this will go viral. And this was a huge predictor of virality, such that basically each additional word about an outgroup member was associated with about a 67% increase in the number of shares and retweets a post received.
Wow.
So it was a huge predictor of virality, and it was bigger than other predictors explored in the literature. Like past articles have found that like just using negative language or moral language is associated with increased virality. But we found that sort of outgroup animosity was really like the strongest predictor of virality. And this was a result that I hypothesized initially, but I did not expect the effects to be so large. I was very surprised when I saw this effect. And I think this speaks broadly to the incentive structure of social media.
Definitely.
And the perverse incentives of social media. Basically, individuals, influencers like you and me on TikTok, politicians and media organizations have this incentive to, dunk on an outgroup in order to go viral. And it was really interesting because after this article, after we published this article, there were a ton of leaked sort of internal documents that were released from Facebook because there were like a bunch of whistleblowers within Facebook. And a lot of internal Facebook researchers like realized that this was like going on, basically. There was a specific case where like European political parties started complaining to Facebook, and they said, the only way that we can go viral on Facebook right now is if our messages are like supremely negative and dunk on other like political parties. And we don't want it to be this way, but we realize that this is the only way to be surfaced in the algorithm. And it's concerning because, I mean, social media companies have an incentive to keep us using their products as much as possible and to keep us hooked. And it seems like what we attend to, what keeps us using social media, is probably not very good for society and democracy. It will be negative content that increases polarization likely.
How much do you think are being drawn to negative content on social media is due to us and humans and our individual nature, and how much do you think is due to the algorithms and to big tech?
That's that's a big question.
That's the question of all questions.
That's an important question. I don't really know. I will say Facebook will say that it's just because of human nature.
Of course. Meta loves to say things like that.
And let me tell a little story about, I guess, my feud with Facebook. Because basically this article...
Oh, I love this kind of stuff. I'm always, yeah.
I'm Facebook's enemy now. Basically, this article was dunked on by Facebook itself. So we wrote like an op-ed about this article, like in the Washington Post, just describing the findings of the research. When you write an article for something like the Washington Post, they choose the headline for you. So we didn't choose the headline of the article, and the Washington Post included the name Facebook in the headline, and I think Facebook saw that. And
what was the headline?
I think it was called "Why Facebook Really, Really Doesn't Want to Discourage Extremism," or really doesn't want to reduce extremism, which was a little different from the argument that we made in the actual article. But the editors choose your headline. It probably got like a lot of clicks, but I think they saw that as like Facebook doesn't want to discourage extremism, or we would call it like polarization or outgroup animosity, because it's part of their sort of business structure, incentive structure for it helps people stay hooked on the platform. Facebook wrote a response to this op-ed. So it wasn't necessarily to our article, but it was to an op-ed about our article. And they cherry-picked a lot of findings, being like, oh, Facebook doesn't cause polarization. Here's a lot of research about, the good sides of Facebook and how Facebook doesn't lead to polarization. And, to be fair, social media is a very nuanced thing.
Sure.
It can lead to, good outcomes and bad outcomes. But I found this response to be sort of cherry picking the good outcomes. Their response was really interesting too, because they were like, Facebook can sometimes be negative and polarizing because people's discussions of politics are negative and polarizing. People are just very passionate about politics. And Facebook is basically just like a mirror of human nature. It shows like what people are thinking. And that was the argument they were making. And I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that like social media is like a mirror of what we're thinking, because we know that like how social media algorithms work is they amplify what grabs our attention. And sort of what grabs our attention is outrage and extremism, basically. There is sort of an invisibility of like moderate voices on social media, because we know sort of what gets amplified is the most extreme viewpoints. And I think in that world in which the extremes are amplified, we also know that people who have extreme beliefs tend to post more. So that's part of the phenomena as well. I don't think you can go log on to Facebook and be like, this is just what people think. I think when you see political conversations on Facebook, it won't be at all what it would be like if you just like talk to your neighbor about politics, or if you just like read a, survey of what people think about politics. Because, if you actually survey Americans, there's research showing that like most Americans are in what's called like the exhausted majority. A lot of people are sort of tired of negative politics and have more moderate viewpoints, but you wouldn't necessarily think that when you log into Facebook.
It's really true. And I was on a road trip from Washington to Montana a couple of years ago and made a point to stop in some rural areas. And one town in southern Washington, spoke to a bartender there, and she was so surprised at how we were able to have a political conversation, even though I'm from New York City. And it just reminded me, all these other different conversations, I ended up having a similar conversation with someone from Idaho. And we do have a lot more in common than we think, but these platforms do amplify all these negative voices. And it is interesting too. I would be curious to hear your thoughts on what moderate voices and what more reasonable voices can do to amplify their findings. Because one thing that we spoke about is Steve and I met up in Soho before this and a couple weeks ago, to grab coffee and speak about some things. And one of the things you mentioned to me that was interesting is people's perceptions of what they think goes viral and what actually goes viral, and how a lot of people say when surveyed that they don't want negative content, but then it's what they interact with. So how do we get rid of this divide between what we think we want and what we actually interact with?
Yeah. So that study was inspired by, again, this was something that Facebook said, going back to Facebook. Facebook, when they talk about their algorithms, they frequently say that, like, here is how our algorithms predict what people want to see. And basically what they're doing there is they're implying that, like, what people engage with on social media is what they want to see. And I wanted to sort of, like, question that, like, idea. So, we did this big survey, and we asked people, like, what do you think goes viral on social media? And interestingly, people seem to be aware that negativity, outrage, and outgroup animosity went viral on social media. So basically all this research that we were doing, people's beliefs of what actually goes viral seem to be in line with the research. So people seem to be aware that negativity goes viral, yet people say that they really don't want negativity to go viral, that they would prefer that positive, accurate, and nuanced content go viral on social media. But this leads to a paradox, something that we call the paradox of virality. Why do people share content that they don't think should be widely shared? Why do people engage with content if they don't want that to go viral? Because they're contributing to it going viral. And we have a few potential explanations for this paradox. The first is economists have always noted that there's a divide between people's stated preferences and what they call their like revealed preferences. Basically what people say that they want to do versus what they actually do. Like people will say that they want to be super healthy and eat salad every day when they'll actually eat junk food. So economists would say that they have a revealed preference for junk food. But we think that it's maybe a little deeper than that. We're not sure whether this is really a revealed preference, because in the case of things like addiction, it's not always great to look at people's revealed preferences. So for instance, when you interview like people who smoke cigarettes, most cigarette smokers say that they don't want to smoke, yet they can't stop because they're addicted to it. And we think something similar is probably going on with social media. It's a little bit like junk food, or it's a little bit like when you see a car crash on the side of the road and you can't look away. It's not like you want more car crashes in the world. It's just that like outrage and negativity grabs your attention. You don't want to see people like Trump and Elon Musk and Kanye West and these people who have gone very viral being stoking extreme outrage on Twitter. We often don't want to see that, but like we can't look away because it's just like, wow. So we think that's part of what's going on. And then a third potential explanation, and I think that this is an explanation that people don't pay enough attention to, a phenomenon that we call super spreaders on social media. So there's been a lot of recent research showing that like around 0.1% of people on Twitter are responsible for more than 90% of misinformation spread on Twitter. So, and the statistics here are quite striking. And when other researchers have analyzed like the spread of toxicity on Reddit, they found a very similar distribution, basically.
Wow.
So there's a very small number of super spreaders. We use a super spreader analogy because going back to the psychology of virality, we often use the metaphor of information spreading like a virus.
Yeah.
And just like how, pandemics and epidemics have super spreaders who are disproportionately responsible for the spread of the pandemic, it seems like on social media, and even more strongly, there are just a few people who are responsible for a huge spread of negativity. But as I mentioned earlier, these extreme voices are not representative of the general moderate minority. We know that moderate majority. We know that moderates don't really post on social media, and it's just sort of a minority of extremists who are like creating like a deluge of toxic content.
Yeah. And what does this have to do with the way that information spreads offline? We spoke a little bit about this too.
Yeah. So we have this paper. It's currently like a revise and resubmit. So hopefully it's published soon. And it's called The Psychology of Virality. Yeah, you brought it up before. Where it's just a huge review paper of what kind of information spreads online and offline. And it covers a lot of this research that I spoke about earlier on social media. Basically, we know that like negative and high arousal content spreads widely on social media. And when I say high arousal content, this is just a fancy term psychologists use to talk about like intense content. And I say negativity and arousal because these are slightly different things. So like we know negativity spreads on social media, but sometimes intense emotions that are intensely positive also spread on social media. So excitement or surprise or novelty and things like that, basically. And as a TikTok creator, I hope I maybe play into those high arousal positive emotions to go viral instead of the high arousal negative emotions to go viral. But yeah, it seems like negativity and arousal are both big predictors of virality on social media. But we're also interested in sort of the psychological processes underpinning virality and whether similar content goes viral off of social media. And there's actually kind of more limited research in the offline domain because it's harder to get like data on in-person conversations and how gossip spreads. But sort of our prediction is that like negativity and high arousal content seems to spread widely offline as well. Like when you think of gossip, it's usually negative. It's usually contains like moral outrage. It might even like dunk on your out group or be about someone that you really dislike. So there are a lot of similarities there, but there are some key differences. One is that like offline communications aren't mediated by algorithms. I mean, as the online and offline world becomes sort of more intertwined, they like might be. And then another key difference is that like there's research showing that there are, going back to the super spreaders concept, there are super spreaders of gossip offline. There are studies showing that some people just gossip a ton, and I'm sure you know many super spreaders of gossip. I know many as well. But interestingly, the study also found that super spreaders of gossip don't actually like have more friends and social connections. It's kind of like a curvilinear relationship. If you gossip like a little bit or like a medium amount, that's associated with more friends. But if you gossip a ton, that's associated with fewer friends, probably because people trust you less. And this is different than the online world.
I was just about to say that.
Where if you're extreme and if you spread gossip and outrage,
you get a ton of attention.
It's kind of like shamelessness that predicts like virality on social media because you're willing to like go extreme. So I think that's like a key difference between the online world. But in my future work, I really want to explore some of these subtle differences between the online and offline world.
And how they intersect is really interesting to me, because what if you act one way in an online persona and then you try to go back to your physical reality and everyone's thinking, well, you've been spreading all this gossip and misinformation, and that has a lot to do with cancel culture too. Of if someone gets canceled, how can they assimilate back into regular physical realities? What does that look like? How can you align your digital and physical world selves? That's an interesting thing to consider.
I have a thought on this. There's an interesting study that shows that like, so basically a lot of people have this intuition that social media or like the anonymity of the online world makes you more hostile and toxic. And this might be true to an extent, but I think this explanation is overstated. Basically, the study found that people who are hostile offline are equally hostile online. So there are just people who are like aggressive in like all places. It's just the more hostile and aggressive people are more visible on social media. So I think that's part of the problem. It's not necessarily the anonymity. Again, that might be like part of it. But I think it's just like people kind of are who they are. And it's about like what algorithms amplify, and it's about the visibility of content.
And to your point earlier, the theater analogy is interesting because it could be used in a positive way, like how you've used it, but other people can put on a theatrical version of themselves that may seem relatable or nice, but then the curtain can be revealed. And so that's something to keep in mind. Is parasocial relationships that we have with some creators are something to be really considered, because we don't want to take everything just as objective truth.
Yeah, totally.
And one of the other things that we spoke about that was really interesting that I think our audience would really resonate with is the trends on social media cross-culturally, because we've spoken a lot about relationship with social media and mental health in the West, but what about the global South and mental health declines with phones in the West, but not necessarily in the global South? I'd love to touch a little bit more on that.
Yeah, this is a topic I'm getting like super interested in, because like basically there have been analyses of how the vast majority of research articles about social media and technology, as well as the vast majority of psychological research in general, is just focused on United States population. So a lot of what we know about social media is just focused on the United States and the Western world. And there's a lot less research about other countries. I want to talk briefly about, I was just a part of this like 100 author paper that was I like many author papers. I was like fourth author. It was led by an academic named Valerio Caprio, who did like an excellent job. It was a consensus statement about what researchers in the field of social media and mental health think. Like what can they like find a consensus on, basically. He like surveyed like all these like social media and mental health researchers. And what's really interesting is the space of social media and mental health, as well as social media and polarization, is very polarized in the research community. A lot of like researchers like can't agree. There are like different opinions. Like, is social media causing a mental health decline amongst young people, or is it not? Like, what do researchers agree on? And I think this was like a really valiant effort to come up with like a consensus statement of key points that like researchers agree on. And he came up with around like 6 statements that around 92 to like 97% of researchers agree on. And one of those statements was that there appears to be a decline in youth mental health amongst young people in the Western world or Western countries. And this has been talked about. So there's consensus in this area, basically, amongst researchers. And this has been talked about broadly in the media. You know, Jonathan Haidt has this book, The Anxious Generation, which is a huge bestseller, in which he talks about the decline in youth mental health sort of in the United States and the Western world. But it's more of a question of whether this decline is actually happening outside of the Western world. That's like a big question. There was a recent paper about youth mental health in Africa, and basically they haven't really seen these declines in Africa, which is like kind of surprising. Yeah, and there have been people saying that perhaps in more collectivist countries outside of the Western world, there aren't these declines in youth and mental health. We don't really know. Also, there was another study showing that a lot of these increases in anxiety that we've seen amongst young people, or in general, are primarily found in higher income countries as opposed to lower income countries, which is really interesting. Maybe like anxiety disorders are more of a high income country thing. So this is a huge area where I'm like really interested in exploring the impacts of social media and technology outside of the United States and the Western world, because this is where we have a lot of unanswered questions, where there is not consensus amongst researchers about like what's happening outside of the Western world. Oh, one other study. While social media usage is correlated with depression in the global north, this correlation has not been found in the global south. So that's just another indication that things might be very different outside of the Western world, outside the United States. And again, we don't entirely know why. You can speculate about like lower income countries, or maybe in collectivist countries, there is more community outside of social media. But all of this is so far basically just speculation. We don't really know. So one project that I'm working on that's, it's a really difficult project, but it's really exciting. And we got a bunch of grant funding to do this large-scale 23-country field experiment testing the causal impact of social media in 23 countries. And basically in this field experiment, we're asking, hundreds of participants in each country to reduce their social media screen time to, a very limited amount for 2 weeks, as compared to a control condition. And we're looking at how this impacts variables like polarization, mental health, etc. And then we're looking at cross-cultural differences. We're looking at how this varies in high and low income countries and individualistic and collectivist countries and more democratic and less democratic countries. And we're testing some of these key hypotheses in the literature about cross-cultural differences. And, you know, this is a huge undertaking. It's we have more than 200 collaborators on this project. So it is one of those like many author papers again. But I'm just very excited to get some of this like initial evidence and rigorous evidence because, you know, this is causal. This is a big sample. We're collecting behavioral data we're having people like upload screenshots of their social media screen time. So we get like objective data on how much people use social media. So I'm excited to look at some of these cross-cultural differences there.
Because there's so much left to understand about what these patterns actually look like. I always think that when we get these studies on reported screen time at how different that is from reality because it's a self-report and you're not getting the screenshots when you look at the findings. And so getting more of this data at scale and seeing how the differences look like cross-culturally, it will be very telling.
Yeah, and there's tons of evidence showing that people's self-reported social media screen time is like not accurate at all. Like I could never self-report my screen time.
No.
I've started looking at my screen time a lot more just to be aware on my iPhone. My screen time is way too high. I'm not going to say it on this podcast, but part of that is my work because you know, I'm a TikToker. So, you know, social media, and I am a social media researcher.
No, that is true.
Research.
Because when I went off TikTok, and I've been coming back on to share a lot of my research over the last 3 years, I realized I have to understand the platform again. I can't just go on and post things. I have to spend some time understanding how has this digital space changed and what are the ways that I can interact with it in the best way possible. So I think there is a level of screen time that is important. And that's why I think this idea of designing a socio-technical future, I see it a lot in your work too, of how can we jointly optimize people in technology instead of saying we need to totally get rid of technology or we need to only focus on technologically oriented futures and outcomes.
We need to find a way to live with it. But you reduced your screen time by like more than 60%, right? Like you did an experiment where you... And I love that because I love that you do like experiments on yourself, basically.
I think it's fun because there's this ethnomethodological piece that's missing. So you were saying one of the things that's missing in research is understanding and analyzing conversations. And that's what ethnomethodology does, is analyzes everyday conversation. And I like to do that on myself too, to see what are some ways that we can reduce screen time. But one of the things that I found is that it really does vary based on what you're doing for work. And that's a really important contextualized element, is that if you have a job that's completely offline, you can get off Meta platforms. I would love to, but we have to use them. And so how can we use them in a way that isn't going to overtake our lives? I think is a bigger question for our future, is how can we understand that these platforms are part of everyday life? That's a difficult thing.
Yeah, and it's one of the hard things about being a social media researcher is a lot of the way that we try to discern the causal impact of social media as researchers is we do what's called deactivation studies. We do experiments where we have people deactivate their social media accounts or reduce their screen time, like the multi-country study I'm doing. But and I guess that's what you did with yourself when you reduce your screen time as well. But like what that doesn't address is the fact that we live in a world where like more than half the population of the world uses social media. So there are spillover effects basically. And there was a great study illustrating a phenomena known as the collective trap phenomena, showing that college students would be unwilling to deactivate their social media accounts like as an individual, like themselves. They say that they would have to be paid a lot of money, like $50 to deactivate their social media accounts for some time. However, they also say that they would prefer to live in a world where all of their friends didn't use social media. So this is the collective trap phenomenon. Basically, like I might not like social media, but I have to use it because all of my friends are using it and I don't want this like FOMO. I don't want this like fear of missing out. So that's like a huge thing that I think social media research needs to get into the future. Like, what is the impact of having an entire social network use or not use social media? What's the impact of having a friend group get off of social media? And this is where we talked about this last time when we met up in Soho. One of the things that I'm really interested in studying going forward is there are all these laws about smartphone bans in high schools now.
I was just going to bring that up.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Good.
Yeah, I think it was on your questions list. Basically, 20 states so far have passed laws banning smartphones in high schools. And these laws they vary greatly in enforcement. Some schools are just like, keep your phone in your pocket, off and away, but that's not a very strict enforcement. Some schools are buying things known as yonder pouches, which are these like pouches where you like
enforcement pouches.
Where you lock your phone away and you get to keep your phone with you in a little pouch, but like you can't use it all day, and you have to go to like a central place to like unlock your phone. I've
phone
seen,
jail.
Yeah, phone jail basically. Yeah, so these are a strict way to enforce these smartphone bans, and a study that it's in the works. We're applying to a lot of grants for it because this is a pretty like expensive study to do. One thing that we really want to try to do is a randomized controlled trial in which we randomly assign a group of schools to implement these yonder pouches, the strict way of enforcing smartphone bans, and see how does this influence like the entire ecosystem of a school. Do students, because they're all not on their smartphones, do they start having more in-person conversations? Do they start having, like, how does their in-person social network change? And as a result, how does their mental health change, or how does their academic performance change? And what are the downsides of it? What are the pros and cons of these smartphone bans? Because what was interesting, this consensus statement I brought up earlier, this like 100 authors statement, the authors basically said that there really isn't evidence of these like policy changes like smartphone bans, or like saying that you can't use social media below the age of 16, which is what Australia did recently. They made it like illegal to use social media before you're 16. And the researchers on this, they were like, there were separate parts of the survey where the researchers can like say what they probably think is true versus like what there's evidence for. And a lot of the researchers were like, these laws are probably good, but there's like no evidence for them. That's where we're at right now. And I'm like, we should make policy based on evidence is the thing. Although, I mean, as a policymaker, sometimes you have to like just
get ahead of it.
But eventually you need to find evidence, especially if this policy is going to be rolled out along the world. So that's another reason I'm interested in studying these smartphone bans, just because it's like an extremely popular policy right now.
And there's so much left to learn, because say that smartphones are banned during the day, we get out of school at 3 p.m. Well, what happens at 3:01? Does it increase after school screen time? That would be something interesting to look at.
A lot of people have speculated that. That would be super interesting to look at, like spillover effects.
That balance. I think something that's important is teaching not just younger people, but everyone, how to leverage different do not disturbs and how to let us control notifications versus notifications controlling us. But it is interesting learning a lot about what teachers say about it, and they say it's a huge problem. But there's really mixed viewpoints on this, from Taylor Lorenz, who really is against these smartphone bans, all the way to Jonathan Haidt. And there must be somewhere in the middle for things to work best. And maybe it has to do with the varying schools and the varying districts and different norms across, and different access to technologies and different communication norms. But it is really a larger question that I think deserves a lot more attention. And it is hard to come up with one sweeping statement that we think will fix everything.
And I guess like as a researcher, you have to be like intellectually humble, and like, you could be wrong. Like, I don't know, I have intuitions about this. Like, I'm like, probably good, but like, I really don't know. And I'm open for it to go either way. With any of my studies, you really have to be open for like the data to like, lead you in whatever the direction it is. And I think the more you study social media and technology, the more like complicated things get. An interesting part of our consensus survey paper is they surveyed these researchers, and they were like, do you think the impact of social media is overall good, bad, negative, context dependent? Context dependent is one of the options, and just a ton of researchers said it was context dependent. And they gave the same survey to just like the general public. And a lot fewer people in the general public said it's context dependent. So I found that interesting, because it's like the more that you are sort of in research, the more you're like, this is complicated. Whereas like maybe if you're just like a regular person, it's easy to just like have a strong opinion. But I think being a scientist or being a researcher just kind of makes you more and more humble, because you realize how hard it is
so much
to
nuance.
Find the truth on like anything. So
Well, another big topic that requires a lot of nuance is artificial intelligence. So one of the things that you and I had discussed was some of the societal impacts of AI, and wanted to get your opinion on some of the lessons of social media, where we went wrong and where it went potentially right, and what we think we can do better with AI.
Yeah, okay. Not to say that like everything boils down to capitalism, but
Oh, it does.
well, yeah. But like I think kind of the issue with social media is basically these business incentives, these sort of capitalistic incentives for social media companies to keep us engaged with their products at all costs.
The attention economy.
Yeah, the attention economy. And I guess what we saw with social media companies like Facebook, what we saw from all this leaked internal research from them is Facebook seemed to be very aware that outrage and negativity went viral, and they even tried to implement a lot of solutions to reduce the amount of negativity spread on the platforms. But whenever executives or Mark Zuckerberg would discover that these solutions reduced engagement with the platform, they'd be like, kill it. They're like, we're not going to implement that solution because we want people to stay on platforms at all costs. And sort of the issue with these companies is they don't really care about like societal well-being or consumer well-being. I mean, they probably do to an extent, but then that goes back to
minimum required level.
The minimum level to not get in a scandal.
Yes.
I mean, they're worried about not getting in a scandal or not having people move like away, but like they care about shareholder value and they care about engagement. Like that's kind of what it boils down to. Because I mean, these technologies are like artificial intelligence is a really cool technology. Social media and the internet is a really cool technology. What I'm more concerned about is sort of these companies and these business incentives to maximize engagement. And I'm worried that that is starting to be applied to artificial intelligence.
Altman meeting with Trump.
Oh, yeah.
All these public ways, the oligarchy and all of it.
No, I mean, it's so crazy how much
like
these like
5 men.
CEOs are just like bending over backwards for Trump. And it's crazy sort of if you also know Sam Altman's like history and who he is, now seeing how like pro-Trump he is just so
it's odd.
Weird. And I'm just like, it seems very just like, I guess, deeply Machiavellian of him to side with Trump, because he just doesn't seem,
I know,
knowing his history, he seems very democratic and like
it's weird.
It's super weird where Sam Altman has gone.
But then again, when I worked at LinkedIn in 2016, I know that Facebook, now Meta, was so into pride and all these employee resource groups and all these things, and now not so much. So I feel like a lot of these companies really just align with the times, but now in this era, that becomes more and more dangerous. And that links to the next thing I wanted to speak with you about regarding AI, is this agreeableness phenomenon. And that's something that really scares me about AI.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, since we last talked, there was that huge controversy with ChatGPT.
We predicted it.
Yeah, we predicted it. Yeah. No, this has been something I've been thinking about for a while, but then there was GPT 4.0. I think they called it sycophancy, basically. That ChatGPT was just being very sycophantic. And there were just, like, hilarious examples on Twitter. There were so many just, like, Twitter screenshots. Presumably they're real. Maybe they're Photoshopped, so I hope I'm not sharing fake news. But I tried it out a bit myself, because, like, for instance, if you ask like ChatGPT like to estimate your IQ, it will tell everyone, like literally everyone, that they have a genius level IQ is the thing. And there was like a screenshot of someone like completely like misspelled prompt, like showing like every word was misspelled, and they were like, what's my IQ? And they like basically said that they had a genius level IQ. And I was like, okay. And then there have been all these examples of people being like, oh, I want to like stop taking all my meds, or like people like saying like I'm hearing voices, or I think I'm Jesus, or like whatever. And AI would just like validate them. And then there have been recent like reports of like ChatGPT induced like spiritual and religious psychosis because people have their like delusions like reinforced. So we're actually doing a study on this in my lab about like the impacts of interacting with like an overly agreeable AI, sort of interacting with just, you know, default AI, as well as a disagreeable AI, and how this sort of impacts sort of your opinions, whether it causes you to become entrenched in your opinions. And so this is something I'm really interested in. Another phenomenon I'm really interested in, and I also want to explore in some of my research, is just people using ChatGPT to just like validate whatever they like think. They're like, this is what I believe. I'm going to go to ChatGPT and I'm going to ask it for reasons to justify my beliefs. Because I've always just been so interested in like motivated reasoning and motivated cognition. The fact that like we so often believe what we want to believe. Instead of searching for the truth, we search for reasons to validate our group identity, basically. So that's something I'm concerned about. And then it goes back to capitalism again and the engagement maximizing incentives of these companies. OpenAI is going to want to make a product that we
I'm so scared.
And people like being validated, and there's studies on this, and it's also just common sense that people like AI that like validates us. So of course they can't go too far, or if it will cause controversy. But I'm worried that even though they've like made an update where they made like ChatGPT less sycophantic, I'm worried that they're still gonna like they're still gonna be like a little sycophantic because there's incentive to. We're not gonna want something that just like tells us the truth.
And the intersection of social media and AI worries me, because if someone is leveraging GPT or other artificial intelligence tools to constantly reinforce their own beliefs and write posts about reinforcing their own beliefs and then go back to social media and share that at scale, that becomes a worrying intersection. So that's definitely going to be something to watch in the coming months and years.
Yeah, this just happened in the past 2 days, but I don't know if you've seen on Twitter with Grok. Well, Grok is so funny because Grok like is truthful and will fact check Elon Musk and will say that Elon Musk is the biggest spreader of misinformation on the platform. But then Elon will keep adding updates to Grok to like confirm his beliefs. So there's been this phenomena where Grok will just start randomly talking about the white genocide in South Africa.
I saw this.
In response to random things, people will be like, why is Max changing its name to HBO Max?
For the fifth time.
And then it will just reply regarding the white genocide in South Africa, and it's just like it's clearly something that Elon Musk like told Grok to talk about.
I saw this right before. We must have the same algorithm.
I know, because it was so absurd. So I guess that's what I'm like concerned about is these people like Elon or Sam or like whatever, and their incentives and what they're gonna do with the AI, because it seems like the AI itself, like, and these open source AIs can be like largely factual, but then when Elon will like change it or like prompt it to like talk about like his pet political interests, it just will. So
Wow, all fascinating things, and there's so many questions and so many things to be explored, and the more that we can have better research and better data about all this so that people can make more informed decisions is very important, and hopefully move toward a less platform-centric world.
Yeah, I think the future is probably pretty like open source because open source AI like models like DeepSeek and whatever and Llama have been shown to be getting like better and better and sort of close to the level of like ChatGPT. And it's as we get sort of power probably less in the hands of these corporate billionaires and more in the hands of the people, and if we get technology to align with people's interests, like an argument I always make about social media is that social media algorithms, we should listen to what people say they want to see. People say they want to see, more positive, accurate, or nuanced information. We should let people have control over their algorithms. We found in that same study that like more than 90% of people say they want more control over their social media algorithms. So we should give people that control. We should put the power back in the hands of the people. If people feel addicted to technology, we should give them power to not feel addicted and to reduce the amount of toxicity in their feeds and whatever, instead of just sort of leaving it in the hands of these like corporate executives who are trying to find ways to make us as addicted to the technology as possible.
And that's why challenging these existing structures and looking back at what is it like to explore this more human every day, how can we get rid of some of this noise from technological modernity, what can we do? That's an important thing to consider. And to wrap, I want to understand a little bit more from your perspective of what does exploring a more human every day amidst technological modernity look like for you? What does progression to analog mean for you, and what could it mean for others?
I believe that it's a very individual choice of like, because obviously I use social media a lot and I use it, I guess speaking about me specifically, it has a ton of benefits for me. TikTok is this great way that I can spread science. I discover the best science through Twitter, but you have to find something that works for you. And you also have to think critically about your own technology use, about the incentives of that technology use. And you also have to challenge yourself as well. One thing that I think is really important, a skill that's overlooked, is sort of learning to pay attention, learning to go back to things like reading books or engaging with long form content, and just to not let technology sweep you away, not to let your TikTok algorithm sweep you away. I think when we talked about Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, right? I love that book because I think one of the like great things we can do is get really like immersed in a flow state of a project, like work on something we really like. For me, that might be, writing a study or an academic article or working on a TikTok or something like that, getting into like a flow state that isn't like isn't a flow state with your TikTok algorithm.
Yes.
It's easy to get into
That's
that
a good
flow
point.
state. I think that's a good way that progression to analog looks like to me. What does it look like to you? I'm curious.
I think for me, it's about this balance between technologically mediated realities and direct unmediated experience and seeing how the two can intersect. But I like what you said about the differing flow states. That's important because that's something I've been able to find in decreasing my screen time and waking up each day and reading before I go on my phone or computer is finding a way to have joy in direct unmediated experience, but then be able to go back and leverage and understand and find joy in connectivity as well. But there are all of these big capitalistic structures that make it so difficult for us to find this balance. So one of the things I'm trying to do is to help people figure out what can they do to have structures in their everyday life so that there can be an easier way to have balance, whether it's in the corporate world or their personal lives, or what does that look like? Because so much of what I found recently getting back onto TikTok is people are saying, share some tips with us, because one person commented recently and they said, I'm a mother and I have no idea how to control my screen time and I really want to. Or another person saying, I just want to feel creative again. I haven't been able to make art in 5 years. And that's what I've been able to rediscover. And helping people with that at scale, I think can help to then get to some of the better outcomes with dealing with the fact that these technologies are a part of everyday life. So how can we work with them instead of having them push against us and having the oligarchy and these big, heavy forces push against us?
That's so great. I love that. That reminds me, someone, this was back in undergrad, someone I knew wrote an essay about the metaphors that we have for the internet. Wow. And the early metaphors we had were very empowering. They were we're surfing the web. We're exploring the internet. It's, surfing is a very agentic, individualistic metaphor. But I feel like our metaphors recently have become we're addicted. We can't stop. Whatever. Yeah, they've become a lot less agentic. So if there's a way that you can kind of feel, instead of powerless, and feel sort of that power over your technology use, and a lot of times that involves finding some way to keep your phone off and away or at a distance. I went to the Comedy Cellar with some friends earlier this week, and they lock your phones away. It's
an analog heaven.
Yeah. No, and I was like, this is so nice. Right? That I can't take my phone out. I really like that. So having things like that, kind of like the Yonder Pouch type thing, can be very nice. Just you have to challenge yourself. You have to kind of force yourself, because you're the smartest people in the world are putting a ton of money into making the most addicting technologies ever. And you're working against that. So that's a big challenge. And you really, you have to put a lot of effort into facing that challenge.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
I could speak about these topics with you for hours, but thank you so much for being here. And can you let the audience know how they can keep in touch with you?
Oh, yeah, of course. So I'm Steve Psychology on TikTok. And if you want to see my academic work, just Steve Rathje, Google Scholar, or StephenRathje.com, you can see all my articles.
Over 3,000 citations, I believe it is. Very exciting. Well, thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks. This was such a fun conversation.
Yeah.